They thought demoting me to janitor would break me. What they didn't realize was that in their rush to humiliate me, they forgot one crucial detail. I still had all the executive access codes, and I was about to use every single one of them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it happened, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Financial, watching the sunrise paint the city gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. Coffee steaming in my favorite mug, the one with a chip on the handle that reminded me of my first promotion. I'd been Senior Vice President of Operations for 3 years, the youngest woman to ever hold that position at Sterling. My team respected me. The board trusted my decisions. I'd just closed the biggest merger in company history, bringing in $200 million in new assets. Then my assistant knocked. "Rebecca, Mr. Whitman wants to see you in his office." Her voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Something cold settled in my stomach as I walked down that familiar hallway, past the portraits of previous executives, all men in dark suits with confident smiles. The kind of smiles I'd learned to wear in boardrooms where I was often the only woman speaking. Douglas Whitman sat behind his mahogany desk like a king on a throne, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood his nephew Trevor, fresh out of business school with his father's connections and his mother's sense of entitlement. I'd watched Trevor stumble through presentations, seen him take credit for junior analysts' work, noticed how he nodded along in meetings without understanding a single financial projection. "Rebecca, please sit down." Whitman's voice was measured, professional, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. "We've been discussing your role here at Sterling, and we feel it's time for some organizational restructuring." The words hit me like ice water. Restructuring. Corporate speak for, "You're about to get screwed." I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. "What kind of restructuring, Douglas?" Trevor leaned forward, that smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Rebecca, we think you've been carrying too much responsibility. The stress must be overwhelming for someone of your background." The pause before background was deliberate, loaded with implications. I refused to dignify with a response. "We're promoting Trevor to Senior Vice President," Whitman continued, not meeting my eyes. "He'll be taking over your portfolio, your team, your office. We have a new position for you, though, facilities management. You'll be overseeing the cleaning staff, maintenance schedules, that sort of thing. It's important work." The room spun. Facilities management. They were demoting me from executive level to glorified janitor. Years of 60-hour weeks, of building systems that saved the company millions, of mentoring younger employees and breaking barriers, reduced to checking that the bathrooms had enough toilet paper. "You're joking," I said, though I knew they weren't. "Now, Rebecca, let's not be dramatic," Trevor said, his voice dripping with false concern. "This role comes with significant responsibilities. You'll be managing an entire department." He made air quotes around department, like it was some kind of joke. I stared at him, this privileged child who'd never earned anything in his life, who was about to inherit everything I'd built. "And my salary?" "Adjusted accordingly, of course," Whitman said. $45,000. But think of it as a fresh start, a chance to learn new skills. $45,000. I was making $180. They weren't just demoting me, they were destroying me. Trying to force me to quit so they wouldn't have to pay severance. Wouldn't have to admit they were pushing out the most qualified person in the room because she didn't fit their boys. Club vision. I stood up slowly, my mind racing but my body calm. 20 years in corporate finance had taught me to never show weakness, never let them see you sweat. When do I start? The surprise on their faces was worth every ounce of humiliation they thought they were inflicting. They'd expected tears, expected me to storm out, expected me to make a scene they could use against me later. Instead, I smiled. The same professional smile I'd worn through hundreds of negotiations. "Monday morning," Whitman stammered. "Your new office is in the basement. Level B3. Human Resources will have your badge reprogrammed." But as I walked out of that office, my heels clicking against marble floors I might never walk across as an equal again, One thought pulsed through my mind like a drumbeat. They forgot something. In their rush to humiliate me, to strip away my title and my dignity, they'd made a crucial oversight. I still had my access codes. 20 years at Sterling Financial. 20 years of security clearances, system permissions, executive databases. 20 years of passwords, key cards, and administrative privileges that HR had never bothered to revoke because officially I was still an employee. Just a different kind of employee. My apartment felt smaller that weekend, like the walls were pressing in. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, writing down everything I still had access to. Executive email servers, board meeting minutes, financial projections, client databases, merger documents, personnel files, even the executive bathroom key card, which now felt more symbolic than practical. They thought they'd caged me. What they'd actually done was give me the keys to every lock in the building while removing any oversight of how I used them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Monday morning came too soon and not soon enough. I dressed differently now. Gone were the tailored suits and silk blouses. Instead, I wore dark jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a polo shirt with the Sterling logo embroidered on the chest. The uniform of invisibility. Amazing how quickly people stop seeing you when you're not wearing the costume of power. My new office was a converted storage room in the basement, barely large enough for a metal desk and a folding chair. No windows, just fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. The walls were concrete block, painted institutional beige. It smelled like cleaning supplies and forgotten dreams. But they'd given me a computer. Standard issue, nothing fancy, but connected to the Sterling network. And when I logged in with my old credentials, expecting to be locked out, the system welcomed me like an old friend. Rebecca Morrison, Senior Vice President of Operations. The IT department hadn't updated my access permissions. In the corporate chaos of my demotion, someone had forgotten to flip the switches that would have made me truly powerless. I leaned back in that uncomfortable folding chair and smiled for the first time in days. They wanted me to manage facilities? Fine. I'd manage facilities in ways they never imagined. The first thing I did was access the executive calendar system. Every meeting, every lunch, every conference call was laid out before me like a roadmap. I could see Trevor's schedule, Whitman's appointments, even the quarterly board meetings where they'd discuss how brilliantly the company was running without me. Then I opened the email servers, not to read anyone's personal messages but to understand the flow of information. Who was talking to whom? Which clients were happy? Which ones were getting nervous? Which deals were solid and which ones were hanging by threads that only I knew how to strengthen? The facilities management job gave me something I'd never had before: invisibility with access. I could walk anywhere in the building now. My keycard opened doors from the executive boardroom to the server basement. I could attend any meeting as long as I brought coffee or pretended to check the air conditioning. People talked around me like I wasn't there, like janitors don't have ears or brains or the ability to understand million-dollar conversations. Within a week, I'd learned more about Sterling's vulnerabilities than I'd known in 3 years as an executive. The company was balanced on a knife's edge. The merger I'd orchestrated was more fragile than anyone realized. 3 major clients were considering pulling their accounts due to service issues that were piling up without my systems management. The new software integration that Trevor was supposed to be overseeing was months behind schedule and bleeding money, and I was the only one who knew how to fix any of it. But they'd made their choice. They'd decided my expertise wasn't worth my presence in their boardroom. They'd gambled that humiliation would drive me away, and that Trevor's family connections could replace decades of experience and institutional knowledge. Time to show them how wrong they were. I started small. Nothing dramatic, nothing they could trace back to me. I simply stopped doing the things they'd forgotten I used to do. The little maintenance tasks that kept Sterling running smoothly. The system checks and database cleanups, that prevented problems before they became disasters. For 20 years, I'd been the person who caught mistakes before they reached clients. I'd been the one who noticed when numbers didn't add up, when projections seemed optimistic, when risk assessments missed crucial factors. Now, sitting in my basement office with my executive access still intact, I stopped catching those mistakes. I let them fall through the cracks. The beauty of it was the delay. In corporate finance, mistakes don't explode immediately. They metastasize. They compound. A small error in a risk calculation becomes a major oversight in a client proposal, which becomes a lawsuit 6 months later. A missed software update becomes a security vulnerability, becomes a data breach, becomes congressional hearings. I had access to see it all happening in real time. While Trevor sat in my old office, taking credit for the deals I'd structured, the foundation was already starting to crack. While Whitman played golf with board members and bragged about streamlining operations, the systems that kept Sterling competitive were slowly failing. And the most beautiful part? They had no idea it was happening, because the person who would have noticed, who would have sounded the alarm, who would have fixed it before it became unfixable, was sitting in a basement office in a polo shirt, officially responsible for making sure the bathrooms had enough soap. But I wasn't just watching the decay I'd set in motion. I was preparing for something bigger, something that would prove once and for all that you can strip away someone's title, you can cut their salary, you can try to humiliate them into submission, but you cannot erase 20 years of expertise and institutional knowledge. You cannot delete someone's value by changing their job description. And you definitely cannot do it while leaving them with executive access to every system in the company. They thought they'd broken me. They thought they'd won. They had no idea that their real education was just beginning. The first crack appeared 3 weeks into my new role, and it was beautiful to watch. I was in the 42nd floor conference room, ostensibly checking the thermostat but actually listening to Trevor stumble through a presentation to Sterling's biggest client, Meridian Healthcare. He was trying to explain the quarterly projections I'd spent months perfecting. But without understanding the underlying methodology, his explanations sounded like a child reading Shakespeare. "So you see, Mr. Patterson," Trevor said, clicking through slides with my charts and graphs, "our growth trajectory indicates a sustained upward momentum in the healthcare sector." The words meant nothing. Patterson, a sharp-eyed CEO who'd built his company from nothing, leaned forward with the expression of a predator sensing weakness. "These numbers assume a 15% increase in regulatory compliance costs," Patterson said, pointing at a footnote I'd buried in the appendix. "But the new federal guidelines suggest that's conservative by at least 8%. How does that affect your risk assessment?" Trevor's face went blank. That footnote represented hundreds of hours of research, cross-referencing pending legislation with historical compliance patterns. It was the kind of detail that separated real financial analysis from corporate theater. And Trevor had no idea it existed. "Well, we've factored in various scenarios," he stammered, clicking frantically through slides that didn't contain the information Patterson wanted. I watched from the corner, adjusting an air vent that didn't need adjusting, as Sterling's most important client began to look skeptical. After the meeting, I followed Patterson to the elevator. "Excuse me, Mr. Patterson," I said, my voice quiet and respectful. "I couldn't help but notice your question about regulatory compliance. I manage facilities here, but I used to work in operations. If you need that specific analysis, I believe it's in the supplementary files that weren't included in today's presentation." He studied me for a moment. This woman in a polo shirt who somehow knew more about his business than the executive who'd just pitched to him. "And you are?" Quote, "Rebecca Morrison. I've been with Sterling for 20 years. I handed him my business card, the new one with Facilities Manager printed under my name. The title looked absurd next to my contact information. 20 years, he repeated. "And now you're in facilities?" "Recent organizational restructuring," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But I still care about Sterling's success. The compliance analysis you mentioned projects a 23% cost increase if the Henderson Amendment passes. That changes the entire risk profile of the healthcare portfolio." The elevator doors opened, and Patterson stepped inside. But he held the door and looked at me with new interest. "Ms. Morrison, would you mind sending me that analysis? My email is on our website." That night, sitting in my small apartment with takeout Chinese food growing cold beside my laptop, I compiled the most comprehensive regulatory compliance report Sterling had ever produced, not because I was trying to save the company, but because I was building something more valuable than revenge. I was building credibility. When Patterson received that report, with its detailed methodology and precise projections, he didn't just read it, he forwarded it to his board of directors. He mentioned it in meetings with other CEOs. And word began to spread through the financial district's tight-knit community that someone at Sterling knew what they were talking about, even if it wasn't the person with the fancy title. Meanwhile, Trevor's mistakes were compounding. Without my oversight, the software integration project had devolved into chaos. 3 different vendors were working on incompatible systems, burning through Sterling's budget while producing nothing functional. The project timeline had slipped from 6 months to indefinite, and clients were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Sterling's technological capabilities. I watched it all through my executive access, reading emails between panicked project managers and increasingly frustrated board members. The irony was perfect. They'd demoted me to prevent me from interfering with their vision, but my absence was destroying that vision more effectively than any sabotage could have. But I wasn't content to simply watch Sterling crumble. That would have been revenge, and revenge is just another form of being controlled by the people who wronged you. Instead, I was building my escape route, one contact at a time. The facilities job gave me access to everyone: executives, middle managers, administrative assistants, security guards, cleaning staff. People talked to me because I was invisible, part of the building's infrastructure rather than its hierarchy. And in those conversations, I learned things that would have taken months to discover as an executive. I learned that Margaret Chen, Sterling's head of HR, was quietly updating her resume because she was tired of implementing discriminatory policies disguised as efficiency measures. I learned that David Rodriguez, our best quantitative analyst, was being passed over for promotion because his last name wasn't Anglo enough for Whitman's comfort. I learned that 3 junior executives were planning to leave as soon as their stock options vested because they couldn't stand the toxic culture that had emerged under Trevor's influence. Most importantly, I learned that Sterling's competitors were actively recruiting our talent, not through headhunters or job boards, but through quiet conversations at industry conferences and alumni networking events. Our best people were being offered signing bonuses, better titles, and the opportunity to work at companies that valued expertise over connections. That's when I realized the true scope of what was happening. Sterling wasn't just losing me, it was hemorrhaging talent, and the leadership was too blinded by their own arrogance to notice. They thought my demotion had sent a message about loyalty and hierarchy. Instead, it had sent a message about what Sterling valued, and the company's best employees were reading that message loud and clear. So I started making introductions. Casual conversations in hallways, chance encounters in coffee shops, friendly recommendations passed along through professional networks. I never told anyone to leave Sterling. I simply made sure that talented people knew about opportunities that matched their skills and ambitions. Margaret Chen landed a VP position at a rival firm with a 40% salary increase. David Rodriguez was recruited by a boutique investment company that appreciated his analytical brilliance. One by one, Sterling's institutional knowledge walked out the door, carrying client relationships and strategic insights to competitors who knew how to value them. And the beautiful part was that none of it could be traced back to me. I was just a facilities manager who happened to know a lot of people in the industry. If Sterling's talent was leaving for better opportunities, well, that was just the free market at work. The real turning point came during the quarterly board meeting. I was in the executive conference room, supposedly checking the audio-visual equipment, when the board members arrived for their closed-door session. These were serious people, the kind who'd built companies and understood the difference between style and substance. Whitman opened with a presentation about Sterling's streamlined operations and improved efficiency. He bragged about reducing overhead costs and eliminating redundant positions. He showed charts indicating short-term profit increases from my salary reduction and the elimination of several other senior positions. But then the questions started. Board member Sarah Williams, a woman who'd fought her own battles in corporate America, asked about the software integration delays. Board member James Liu wanted to know why 3 major clients had requested meetings to discuss, quote, service concerns. Board member Robert Vasquez questioned the sustainability of cost-cutting measures that seemed to be affecting client satisfaction. Trevor tried to field these questions, but his answers were vapid corporate speak. We're exploring synergistic solutions. We're committed to excellence across all verticals. We're optimizing our workflow to maximize stakeholder value. Empty words that said nothing and convinced no one. From my position near the back wall, I watched these seasoned executives exchange glances. They weren't buying what Trevor was selling, and they were starting to question Whitman's judgment in promoting him. That's when Williams asked the question that changed everything. "Douglas, what happened to Rebecca Morrison? She's been with this company for 20 years, and her presentations were always thoroughly researched and actionable. I don't see her name on any of these reports." The silence stretched for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Whitman's face reddened as he searched for an explanation that wouldn't sound like exactly what it was. Discrimination disguised as restructuring. "Rebecca has been transitioned to a more operational role," he finally said. "Facilities management. We felt her skills were better suited to hands-on implementation rather than strategic planning." Williams' eyebrows shot up. "You moved your senior VP of operations to facilities management? The woman who orchestrated the Meridian Healthcare merger?" I couldn't suppress a small smile as I pretended to adjust a microphone. The Meridian merger had been my masterpiece. A complex transaction that required navigating regulatory hurdles, cultural differences, and technical integration challenges. It had taken 18 months of meticulous planning and execution, and it had made Sterling $200 million richer. "We believe in utilizing talent where it can have the greatest impact," Whitman said weakly. Liu leaned forward. "And you believe her greatest impact is managing janitors?" The meeting continued for another hour, but I could see the doubt spreading across the board members, faces like cracks in ice. They'd trusted Whitman's leadership, but this decision made no sense from any business perspective. You don't demote your most effective performer unless there's something seriously wrong with your judgment or your values. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway, ostensibly cleaning fingerprints off the conference room doors. I watched Williams corner Whitman near the elevators, her voice low but her body language unmistakably confrontational. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the dynamic. A board member questioning a CEO's competence, a leader being held accountable for a decision that couldn't be defended with logic. That night, I received an email that made everything crystal clear. The sender was Patterson, from Meridian Healthcare, and the subject line was simple: "Coffee?" We met at a quiet cafe downtown, away from Sterling's glass towers and corporate politics. Patterson arrived first, already seated at a corner table with his back to the wall, like a general surveying a battlefield. "Rebecca," he said as I approached, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for meeting me. I have a proposition." I sat down, curious but cautious. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that recognizes talent where it actually exists," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Meridian is expanding our financial services division. We need someone who understands complex transactions, regulatory compliance, and strategic planning. Someone who can build systems that actually work instead of just looking good in PowerPoint presentations." I opened the folder. Inside was a job offer that made my breath catch. Chief Financial Officer. Salary that was double what I'd made at Sterling. Stock options. Full benefits. And most importantly, the authority to build something meaningful rather than just maintaining someone else's mistakes. "Why me?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because you're the one who actually understood my business," Patterson said. "When I asked Trevor about regulatory compliance, he gave me marketing speak. When I asked you, you gave me data that helped me make better decisions. That's the difference between style and substance." I closed the folder and looked across the table at this man who was offering me a lifeline. Not because he felt sorry for me, not because he wanted to right Sterling's wrong, but because he recognized value when he saw it. "There's one condition," I said. "I want to bring my team with me, the people at Sterling who actually do the work while others take the credit." Patterson smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Poaching talent from incompetent competitors is one of my favorite business strategies." The next morning, I sat in my basement office for the last time, typing my resignation letter on sterling letterhead. 2 sentences, professionally worded but devastating in their simplicity. Please accept this letter as my formal resignation from Sterling Financial, effective immediately. I have accepted a position as Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Healthcare. I printed the letter on official company stationery, signed it with the same pen I'd used to sign million-dollar contracts, and walked up 42 floors to Whitman's office. His assistant tried to stop me, but I smiled and said I was just delivering a facilities report. Whitman looked up from his computer as I entered, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something approaching fear as I placed the letter on his desk. He read it twice before the implications hit him. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," I said. "And Douglas? I'm not the only one leaving." Over the next month, Sterling Financial hemorrhaged talent like a punctured artery. Margaret Chen, David Rodriguez, and 6 other key employees followed me to Meridian, bringing their expertise and client relationships with them. The software integration project collapsed entirely without competent oversight. 3 major clients, including 2 I'd personally recruited, moved their business to firms that actually understood their needs. The quarterly earnings report was a disaster. Stock prices tumbled. Board members demanded explanations that Whitman couldn't provide. Trevor was quietly reassigned to a non-client-facing role, though he kept his inflated title and salary. But the real vindication came 6 months later, when Meridian Healthcare was featured on the cover of Financial Times as the fastest-growing financial services firm in America. The article highlighted our innovative approach to regulatory compliance, our client-focused service model, and our ability to execute complex transactions with precision and efficiency. There was a photo of me in that article, standing in Meridian's bright, modern offices wearing a tailored suit and the confident smile of someone who'd found her true value. The caption read, "Rebecca Morrison, CFO, whose strategic vision has transformed Meridian's market position." I framed that article and hung it in my new office, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that your worth isn't determined by how others choose to treat you. Your value isn't diminished by their inability to recognize it. And your potential isn't limited by their small-minded vision of what you should be. They thought demoting me would break my spirit and force me into compliance. Instead, it freed me from the illusion that loyalty to a company was more important than loyalty to my own abilities and aspirations. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about hierarchy and knowing my place. But the lesson I learned was different. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies can give you is the push you need to stop settling for less than you deserve. Sometimes being underestimated becomes your greatest advantage. And sometimes the people who try to diminish you end up being the catalysts for your greatest transformation. Sterling Financial still exists, though its reputation never recovered from the talent exodus and client defections that followed my departure. Whitman retired early, citing health concerns, though industry insiders knew better. Trevor eventually left for a family business, where connections matter more than competence. And me? I built something better than revenge. I built a career worthy of my abilities, surrounded by people who value expertise over politics, results over relationships, and substance over style. They thought they were punishing me for being too ambitious, too capable, too threatening to their comfortable mediocrity. What they actually did was set me free to find a place where ambition is rewarded, capability is celebrated, and being threatening to the status quo is exactly what the organization needs to thrive. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having people show you exactly who they are and what they value. It saves you years of trying to fit into places where you were never meant to stay. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.